something has changed. For the first time in months, I see multiple signals pointing toward a possible turning point in the war. Washington has reportedly delivered a new peace proposal that both Moscow and Kyiv appear willing to discuss. Kazakhstan's President Tokayev has publicly urged Putin to bring the war to an end. At the same time, Putin has doubled down on promises of victory while issuing new territorial claims. But that's only part of the story. The real battlefield is no longer just the front line. Russia has begun sinking commercial ships. Iran is attacking tankers in the Persian Gulf. Global shipping routes are coming under increasing pressure. And behind closed doors, an air ceasefire is emerging as the very first step toward negotiations. Today I'll explain why these events are connected, why attacks on ports may matter more than attacks on cities, why the struggle inside Russia's political elite is becoming increasingly visible, and why the coming weeks could determine whether this war moves toward peace or toward an even more dangerous escalation. Let's get started. I want to begin with what I believe is the most important geopolitical development right now. After the recent phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, new diplomatic activity began almost immediately. American representatives reportedly delivered a new package of proposals to Moscow. Those proposals followed Secretary of State Marco Rubio's declaration that the previous Anchorage framework had effectively collapsed. In other words, Washington concluded that the earlier approach had failed. A completely new negotiating track was needed. As more information began leaking into the media, speculation spread rapidly. Journalists started asking whether the United States had presented Moscow with proposals that Russia actually found acceptable. At almost the same time, President Zelensky publicly stated that Ukraine was prepared for peace. Those remarks were later reinforced by Finnish President Alexander Stubb. He first argued that Ukraine had never been in a stronger strategic position. Then, somewhat unexpectedly, he added that Ukraine was ready to negotiate peace. Against that backdrop, reports from Moscow claiming that Russia viewed the new American proposals positively immediately attracted enormous attention, considering the current military escalation and the growing fears of a wider war. Those reports sounded almost unbelievable. Naturally, reporters turned to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov for clarification. As usual, his response was cautious. He refused to discuss the details publicly and called any media reports premature. However, he also acknowledged that proposals of this kind did exist. According to Peskov, it was still too early to comment on reports concerning discussions between the United States and Ukraine about suspending aerial combat operations. But there's one important detail. His wording was carefully chosen. The negotiations appear to involve not only Washington and Kyiv, but Moscow as well. That distinction matters because any agreement to reduce air strikes could potentially benefit both sides. And if that's true, then an aerial ceasefire may become the first real step toward broader peace negotiations. An agreement to halt air strikes would not benefit only Russia. It would benefit Ukraine as well. That's a point many observers overlook. Some people believe Ukraine now holds the stronger position because its long-range drones have successfully reached cities like Tyumen and Omsk. I don't see it that way. Those drone strikes create dramatic images. Large fires at facilities like wild berries certainly dominate headlines. But strategically, those attacks are secondary. They're not decisive military operations. They're not even primarily designed to destabilize Russia internally. Instead, I believe they serve one specific purpose. They're aimed at exerting psychological pressure on the people who truly control major economic assets inside Russia. According to this interpretation, the real targets are not the public. They're influential figures within Putin's inner circle. The calculation is straightforward. If enough economic and political elites conclude that continuing the war has become too costly, they may begin pushing the Kremlin toward negotiations mediated by the United States. That camp reportedly includes parts of Russia's civilian bureaucracy. Names frequently mentioned include Sergei Kiriyenko, Elvira Nabiullina, Herman Gref, and even Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Despite his public rhetoric, many observers believe Lavrov belongs to the group that sees a negotiated settlement with American mediation as the preferable outcome. This is not a weak faction. It's a powerful one. Its members want the war to end, But there is another faction inside the Russian establishment, the hawks. They argue the exact opposite. In their view, the West has never been weaker. Europe is divided. America is distracted. And they believe Russia may never again have such a favorable opportunity, not merely to defeat Ukraine, but to force a broader strategic victory over the West itself. That internal struggle has become increasingly visible. Public statements from influential Russian figures now reflect these competing visions. One side argues that the conflict must end through negotiations. The other insists that further escalation remains the path to victory. Behind the scenes, both camps are competing to shape Russia's next move. This struggle inside Russia's leadership didn't appear overnight. It exists because the old elite never disappeared. Despite the war, much of the pre-war political and business establishment remains influential. These are people whose wealth, lifestyles, and personal interests were deeply connected to the West. They owned apartments in Geneva, villas on Lake Como, estates in Tuscany, luxury yachts that have since been seized under sanctions. For many of them, Europe wasn't just a vacation destination. It was part of their way of life. Now all of that is gone. Yes, they can still travel elsewhere. China, for example. But for people accustomed to the French Riviera, San Remo, or the Italian lakes, that's hardly an attractive substitute. Many of these figures remain wealthy. They still possess political influence. They still maintain networks throughout Russia's state bureaucracy. And, according to this interpretation, they've grown tired of the war. Their priority isn't geopolitics. Their priority is restoring access to the global financial system and rebuilding their own lifestyles. From this perspective, Russia itself is viewed less as a national project and more as the source of their wealth. That's why they support a negotiated settlement with the West, provided the terms protect their own interests. But the opposing faction sees the situation very differently. Its members come largely from military and security circles. They argue that Russia should seize what they consider rightfully theirs through force. Their logic is simple. History belongs to the victors. If the West refuses to recognize defeat voluntarily, then escalation should continue until it does. Some voices have even floated the idea of dramatically expanding the conflict, believing such pressure would eventually force Western governments to back down. Others strongly reject that approach. They warn that provoking the United States directly would be a catastrophic mistake. Europe, they argue, might eventually compromise. America almost certainly would not. History offers a powerful reminder. The attack on Pearl Harbor transformed the United States from a reluctant participant into a nation fully committed to total war. For those making this argument, the lesson is clear. Never push America into a position where it believes it has no choice but to respond with overwhelming force. That debate is no longer theoretical. It now shapes the strategic calculations unfolding inside Russia itself. This is why we're now seeing more and more evidence that serious negotiations are taking place behind the scenes. From everything currently available, the first practical step under discussion appears to be an air ceasefire. And physically, that matters far more to Ukraine than it does to Russia. From a public relations perspective, dramatic drone footage of burning warehouses or oil facilities inside Russia creates a powerful psychological effect. Those images spread rapidly across social media. They dominate headlines. They shape public opinion. But on the battlefield, the situation looks very different. Russia's retaliatory strikes are producing far greater economic consequences. One of the clearest examples is Ukraine's ports. Russia has intensified attacks on maritime infrastructure. Even more importantly, commercial vessels have reportedly begun avoiding Ukrainian ports altogether. The immediate trigger was the sinking of a Turkish cargo ship near the coast of Odesa. Unlike attacks on tankers, these strikes target bulk carriers transporting Ukraine's exports. That distinction is critical. Ukraine's economy still depends heavily on two industries: steel and grain. Those sectors generate much of the country's export revenue and help sustain the national budget beyond direct Western financial assistance. If commercial shipping stops entering Odessa, both industries immediately come under enormous pressure. Insurance companies don't like uncertainty. Once ships begin sinking, insurance premiums surge or disappear entirely. Ship owners start looking elsewhere. Cargo gets delayed. Trade contracts become more expensive. Some routes simply become commercially impossible. At the same time, Iran's attacks on shipping in the Persian Gulf have already driven insurance costs sharply higher there as well. Taken together, these developments point to something much larger. The global maritime environment is becoming increasingly dangerous. And if that trend continues, Ukraine could face economic pressure far beyond the battlefield itself. That's why I believe suspending the air war isn't simply a diplomatic gesture. It could become an economic necessity for both sides.